So for task 3, there was 3 steps to it. Modify the DOM in some way to indicate to the user the item fails to add to the cart. Also modify the JavaScript so that its ability to add more than one item to the cart, and attempt to modify the PHP so its ability to actually add more than one item to the cart. And by one item it means quantity, for people that were unsure about that, because you can already add multiple items but you can only add them as quantity of one. So we'll go with that. So in this one, well, we'll deal with the first one. Modify the DOM in some way to indicate to the user the item fails to add to the cart. So we already have the add to cart button. Here it is here. And in this code we have the cart status.result option, which we included in the PHP, and that was actually if the item was successfully added to the database for the cart. So we already have the code. Right now it's login failed, so we just actually need to change that line now, and we just need some way to indicate. And that could be as simple as changing the button. I'll apologise now for the coughing and that. But yeah, and the strange gravelly voice. But yes, so that is literally just you can do anything. We could make the whole line red. We could disable the button if it failed. We could make it red. We could add something to the end. I'm just going to make the button, but it was up to you. You could do anything you want. So indicate a failure. We already have the product ID. I'm not really sure how to do this one. How the easiest way to do it would probably be, we could modify things. We could modify the class, add an ID, so we can do the whole red. We'll probably do that. Let's do that one. So it makes the whole line red. So in that section, it's for the product listing, and that is display products, display cart. And it was here, yeah, fetch all products. So for this one, and when we kept adding one, we just need to modify this. So product, there we go, let's add a class, but we can also add an ID to this. So we can go new item dot. Sorry. Yeah, we can set new item, and we can just set an ID equals, and it's product list item, and we'll add actual product ID. So it's product dot product ID, and that should add a product ID now to the. There we go. So yeah, each one's now got its own unique ID, so we can actually target that now within our add to cart if the result failed. So if it's true, if it failed, we know our product ID, so it can be make sure we can see it. Make sure we'll actually go back to the browser view. Make sure we can see that also. So it's down here. So each one now has an ID, a unique ID. So there you go. For the whole listing, we now have a unique ID for all of them. So we can now target the whole row. And we'll go back to the code now. So get element by ID, and it is. We already know the product ID, which is what you're using, so it's product list item ID. Style dot background color, and we'll just set it to red. Make sure our code actually runs. Yep. So now we actually need to make it fail. and we have to actually go and check our PHP now to make sure we can set a failure state. So it was sending to function 2 item ID. So function 2, and we're just going to make it fail every time, just so we can test our code. So I'll go ahead and reload that, and we'll try and add a product to the. As you can see, it failed, but oh, I've got an error. Cannot read the property. That error's in our JavaScript, so we'll just go ahead and correct it. And it's here. Get element by ID dot style dot background color. And there's a chance that JavaScript's not actually reading that ID correctly, so let's go ahead and set a variable. Product plus item plus product ID. It's ID name dot style dot background color. It's still not reading the property. Okay. And we'll quickly go back. There's a minor error here. I hope you are happy that I'm showing that people do make mistakes all the time in code. There's nothing wrong with it. So, and we'll actually just check and see. Element, and it's product list item, and it's lowercase I. There we go. We'll save that. Sorry, didn't show you that one. I'll show you this here. So it's product list item, and it's a lowercase I. Go back to our code window, and we'll correct it. And we'll give it a refresh again. You can see I'm having a problem with the browser, and there we go. So we're now successfully showing that items aren't adding. We're given some sort of visual indication, and that was what we were asking for. So we can go ahead and reset this to true. So our PHP, we'll just reset that line there to true, so that our result actually adds. It's actually adding them anyway, but so that was the first section. Modify the JavaScript so it's the ability to add more than one item to the cart. So there is multiple ways to do this. I'm just going to add in a number, an input box next to the add to cart button, and set it to default 1. So again, that's back in the section where we actually generate our product listing, and it's add product. Add a product item that's right here, and we can check our code or browser view and see if it's best to add it. So in here we've got our name, our quantity, and our add to cart. So I think it would be good to stick it at the end of quantity. I will just put an extra little div in there before the add to cart. So let's go ahead and do that on the code. And it's quantity, and there it's there. So create that, we're adding the text, and now we're going to add document dot create element, and it's a div. And inside that, well, we're going to want to add an ID to it. I'll add an ID to the selector. So inside that, we're going to add so I'm just going to go ahead and add sometimes these number selectors are called spinners. create element, and we're creating an input. We call it the spinner dot set attribute. We're going to set the type. We're going to make it type of number. We're going to append that to the div. Well, actually, we're going to add an ID first so it can determine which one it is. So new spinner dot ID equals now let's make sure it's got unique ID, and then we'll append it to the div. Now we'll see how that looks. Probably not very good, but yeah, as we said, probably wouldn't look very good, but yeah, it's in there. So it's just because it's got no styling on this div here. So we can go back and add. Going to go ahead and use the product quantity one just now. We can change it later. I'm not showing the code arm. So new selector dot, and then we'll add the class, and we'll go ahead and refresh that. It's still pushing it because it's set to 40%. You're not seeing that again. Still pushing it over because it's set to 40% because we're using the product quantity. Even something like 20% was enough. And that was given as that. So we can go ahead and just change the code and add the styling. So product quantity selector, got our style. We were using the product quantity one, so we can just go ahead and copy it. Set it to 15%. That's plenty. Refresh. I've actually changed something. Oh. We didn't actually set our CSS name correctly. There's still some messing up, but that's just down to the CSS. We can correct that. The quantity doesn't need to be that size. There we go. So none of these have numbers in them yet, so it's not really useful. So we can go back to our code and we can set a value. Yeah, we can go ahead and set a nice little value on this. So we've already set the ID. Dot value equals, we'll just set it to 1 by default. There we go, got a 1 in them all now. So that's actually given us the ability to add a quantity now, which is good, but it doesn't actually change the quantity in our code. But we can go ahead and we can change the add to cart button. And it's right here, so it's add to cart. So we're actually going to change the add to cart function also. So we're getting product ID, but we're also going to take the product quantity. And we're going to set it to a default of 1 just in case it doesn't get sent. It's never used, that's fine. But we'll be using it, so that's how to change that function. Everything should still work as it does, because there is a default value. It's set in 1, so even though it's not using this yet, it's using the default value from the function, which is here. We change the function signature, added product quality, and we set default to 1. So if you don't send product quality, it always sets it to 1. With that, we can go ahead and change our get value. So we're going to add another get item. So ampersand. Ampersand. And we're just going to call it quantity equals, and we're going to send that to home. So that's changed that function. So function 2 now takes product quantity. So we can go into our function 2, which is case 2. And you can already see we've already got a 1 in here. We're only checking if it's set. So, but it'll always be set now, even if it's only 1. I'm going to go ahead and expand this to also check that the get value for product quantity is also set. So this section of code won't run now unless that's also set, which, well, we only called it quantity, so that always failed there. There we go. And if it is set, make sure you can see the code. If it's set, we'll actually store it as a value. Remember, this is not super secure because we're not going to worry about that right now. And right here is our product quantity, and we can just set it to quantity. And that updates the code now, so we can now add more than multiples of 1. We'll save that. I'll get a little run. And it should still only be adding 1 to them. You can see that it is still adding products to the cart. And it's only adding quantity of 1. So that's that section of code now done. But we want it to actually be able to take the value from our input box here. So now we need to go back to our code and change our add to cart function, which is there, but that's not the section we actually need to change the section that creates that button, which was up here. Yeah. Add to cart is right here, where it sets the product ID. And at that point we can actually use the ID from this, from our input box. So they've all got a unique ID. Product quantity spinner 83, because the product ID was 83. So we can actually use that value right in our JavaScript. And it's product quantity spinner plus the product ID. Plus the product ID. Dot value, because we're wanting the value from the spinner. And we just need to make sure our code is correct. So send the product ID, we're sending the spinner. Add the cart, open it up. We've got an extra little value on here. There we go. Just realising that the code was out the bottom of the window, so we're modifying this line. Set an attribute. We'll go back to our code and hit refresh. And our JavaScript should now be product quality spinner a3.value. So it should be taking it. We've got an extra little quote there. I need to go back to our code and correct that. So right there. Product ID, and it should have been there. And this is unlikely to work, but we'll give it a try anyway. So, go ahead and we'll try the beef. We'll set it to 3.5. We'll add it. Oh, we did. It worked. You can see it down the bottom of the cart on your screen. Beef 5. So it's actually adding it. And that's it. We've now added and modified our HTML and DOM and JavaScript and actually PHP to actually add multiples of items. And we'll go ahead and see what the last one was. Attempt to modify the piece. So we've done it all as one. So that was all of task 3. So I hope that's clear. Sorry for the pausing. I have to keep pausing to cough, but